In the fall of 2021, my girlfriend and I booked a remote cabin in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Life had burned us both out. Long hours, city noise, endless notifications. We wanted a total disconnect, and this place promised, with no Wi-Fi, no cell signal, and nothing but nature. Just 2 full days off the grid with board games, quiet, and each other. We found it on Airbnb. It was surprisingly cheap compared to the others, and I remember we actually talked about that, how it seemed too good to be true. We ignored the gut feeling, and that was our first mistake. The drive up was both stunning and unnerving. The road turned into dirt about halfway, narrowing to barely 1 lane. It twisted through thick pine forest with steep drop-offs and no guardrails. Our car kicked up so much dust we had to crawl with headlights on at some points. The final stretch didn't even feel like a road, more like an old fire trail. We only saw one other vehicle, a battered green truck just off the road, half hidden among the trees. There was no one inside, and nobody nearby. It gave me a weird chill that I couldn't shake. When we pulled up, the host was there waiting, an elderly woman, kind but odd. She wore a heavy shawl despite the weather, and had a distant look in her eyes, like her mind was halfway somewhere else. Before she left, she handed us the keys and said, "If anything strange happens, don't hesitate to call me." The way she said it, dead serious, almost too insistent, made both of us look at each other. That was warning number 2, and again we ignored it. The cabin itself was charming, old but well kept. 1 bedroom, a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch with a view straight into the wide, tree-choked valley. There were no neighbours, just wilderness stretching endlessly in every direction. The first night was perfect. We grilled burgers, opened a bottle of wine, and sat out by the fire pit. The air was still, quiet, only the occasional gust through the trees and distant rustles from wildlife. At one point, I thought I heard a loud crack, like a branch snapping deep in the forest, but it didn't seem worth mentioning. It could have been a deer, or it could have been nothing. Around 10 p.m, my girlfriend froze and pointed towards the woods. There was a light, off in the distance, floating. It was dim, faint and slowly moving through the trees. At first I thought it was the moonlight hitting metal, but no, it flickered. It flickered like firelight. It wasn't a flashlight, it was some kind of lantern. Like some kind of old-fashioned flame-lit lantern. It was held low to the ground and swaying gently as it moved between the trees, maybe 200 feet from the cabin. We didn't speak, we just watched. There shouldn't be anybody here. It didn't bounce like somebody hiking, it didn't dart or swing, it glided. It was too smooth, too willful. We couldn't see whoever was carrying it, just the warm glow between the branches, staying parallel to the tree line. Normally this kind of thing wouldn't bother me, but given the surroundings there was something unsettling about what we were seeing. And then, after a few minutes, the light vanished. Not faded, it just blinked out. We waited, it never returned, and eventually we went back inside, but we locked the door and tried to laugh it off, but the silence felt heavier now, like the trees were listening or observing. Later that night, while laying in bed, we heard a soft sound like sticks brushing against the wood of the cabin, from the direction of the porch. We both went still. Moments later, I heard the most awful thing I think I could have ever heard. Off in the distance, I heard the echoed cry of a bird or a small animal making its last sound. I can't describe it. Something out there was for a few seconds in excruciating pain, and seconds later, there was silence. My girlfriend asked me what it could have been. I said I didn't know, it must have been a nighttime predator, but I didn't believe what I was saying. It didn't sound like wildlife predation, it sounded like something sinister, and I wanted no part in knowing what it was. But still, I crept out over to the window and peeked through the curtain. I saw nothing, just the railing and a wall of darkness, but the feeling didn't leave me, like someone or something was still out there. The next morning, I hiked out to where we'd seen the light and where we'd heard the noise, but there was nothing. There was no trail, no cleared space, just rough terrain and tangled brush. Even during the day, it was difficult to navigate. Whoever had been out there obviously knew the land, or didn't care about tearing through it blindly. There were no signs of a campsite, no footprints, just forest untouched. We deliberated whether or not to stay another night. I figured we may as well. The cabin was sturdy with a sturdy door and windows and locks, and besides, we'd only intended to stay for one more sleep anyway. That night, just before 10 PM, it all came back. The same lantern, the same glow, but this time, it wasn't pacing. It was from deeper uphill in the forest. It was moving towards the cabin, towards us. We killed the lights and stood quietly at the window. The glow bobbed slightly as it moved, stopping behind a dense cluster of trees maybe 50 feet from the porch. Then it stopped. This time, I could faintly make out a shape. Not clearly, just a massive shadow behind the lantern, so there was a person. At least it had to be a person. A few seconds later, the lantern blinked out again. I heard my girlfriend gasp, and we waited. Minutes passed, and then hours. And then just before dawn, we heard it. 3 slow knocks on the door. Not loud, just steady. We didn't move, we didn't speak. I was clutching a heavy flashlight, but suddenly it felt completely inadequate. Then, we heard footsteps, soft and measured, circling the cabin as though someone were scoping the place out, or worse, wanted to make themselves known to us. After probably a minute, the footsteps faded and went off into the distance. Silence followed before once more the blood-curdling scream of a creature in pain rang out. We looked at each other, both stunned, terrified and disgusted. Whoever was out there was clearly a sick individual. Eventually, silence fell again. I promised to stay awake all night while my girlfriend slept so that she could drive us out in the morning. And when the sun finally rose, we ventured outside towards where we'd heard the squawking, and found something truly disturbing. At the tree line, somebody had stacked 3 flat small stones upright like gravestones, perfectly aligned, facing the cabin. The stones looked freshly overturned, moist earth still clung to their undersides. On the ground in front of these stones lay sticks, arranged in some kind of rune-like pattern. Behind the stones was a bag of rotted leather, and it was foul-smelling, like burnt meat, and damp earth was inside it. Using my phone, I took a photo, and I've attached it to the bottom of this post for you all to see and to judge what this might be. Then, using sticks, I carefully pried the bag open, and inside was a heap of dead birds. It hadn't been there the day before, and the way it was arranged, it felt distinctly like some kind of warning. We packed up and left within the hour. We skipped breakfast. We didn't speak much, we just drove, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Later that afternoon, I called the host. I told her everything, especially about the lantern. There was a long silence on the line, and then she said finally to us, "So you saw it too?" I asked what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just offered us a full refund, no questions. We never went back, and we never got an explanation. But we did report what we found to the local sheriff's department. The animal cruelty was just too much for us, and we felt sickened by it. We felt that the authorities had to know about that. We did learn something else that weekend, that when your gut tells you something's wrong, you should always listen. My name is Chloe. I'm 32, single, and I travel a lot for work, mostly marketing consultations and corporate training gigs. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, and honestly, I don't mind the solitude. In fact, I've grown to prefer it. There's something oddly peaceful about staying in short-term rentals, slipping into somebody else's curated space and then quietly moving on before anything has the chance to feel permanent. This past March I had a weekend job in a quiet little town just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It was a Saturday through Tuesday assignment. A light workload consisting of a small workshop and presentation lined up for Monday morning, and practical exercises on the Tuesday. I booked a highly rated Airbnb nestled in a calm residential neighbourhood. What really sold me was that the host, a woman named Carol, had the place outfitted with a full security system, exterior cameras on all sides, and this part sealed it for me. She offered guests real-time access to the feed through an app. As a woman travelling alone, that kind of transparency gave me peace of mind. The house was a small bungalow, simple, clean design with big windows, a cosy front porch and a back patio that backed onto a gravel trail bordered by trees. It felt private in a comforting way, the kind of place where you could exhale and not feel watched. I arrived around noon on Saturday, unpacked and knocked out some prep work for the presentation. I ordered Thai food that evening and spent the rest of the night half watching a movie and half scrolling through emails. It was normal, quiet. Sunday was my only full day off, and I tried to carve out something for myself on these trips. I'm a runner. It helps with stress relief, mental reset, all of that. Around 9 AM I laced up and jogged towards a nearby trail I'd found online, Richmond Hill Park. It was only 15 minutes from the house and had glowing reviews. People mentioned a wide gravel loop through tall trees and a creek that wove through it like a ribbon. The weather could have been better, but it was cool, overcast, and just breezy enough to stir the scent of damp, dark, and early spring growth. The trail was quiet, but not deserted. I passed a few dog walkers, another runner or two, enough to feel safe, but not crowded. By my third lap around the loop, I was in the familiar rhythm, music in, thoughts drifting, and that's when I noticed him. He was leaning against a tree just off the trail, about 50 yards out. Not walking, not stretching, just standing, watching. At first I thought maybe he was waiting for somebody, but every time I looped around, he was still there. Same position, same posture, and same stare. What's worse, I started to believe he was staring directly at me, and only at me. He wore a light grey hoodie, the hood pulled down over his brow, but what I remember most were his white training shoes. They were scuffed with bright red laces. They practically glowed against the dusty trail. That detail stuck with me like a thorn. The fourth time I passed, he locked eyes with me. Not casually, not idle. It was the kind of stare that tightens your spine before your brain understands why. I looked right at him, hoping to signal discomfort, hoping to break the gaze. But he didn't. He just continued to stare at me with that intense expression that seemed to go right through me. I tried to shake the unease. After all, it was overcast, but it was still daylight. Other runners were about, and I figured overall, as long as I'm cautious, I should be safe. But by the fifth lap, I slowed down, and that's when I saw that he'd moved. He wasn't by the tree anymore, he was ahead of me now, walking the path slowly, occasionally glancing over his shoulder. He wasn't running, he wasn't trying to pass me or wait for me to pass. Instead, he kept cutting through the inner paths of my running loop, timing his steps so he'd appear just in front of me each time I rounded a bend. He was following me, or at the least tracking me. Every alarm bell in my body started screaming, my heart began to beat and my head raced. I was tired now, and if he decided to intercept or pounce, I was already breathless and fatigued. I kept my pace steady. I didn't let on that I'd noticed his actions, but the moment the trail split near the sidewalk leading out of the park, I turned off and headed straight back towards the house. I checked behind me 3 separate times. No guy, no grey hoodie, no red laces, and most crucially, no sound of footsteps. Still, the feeling of being followed clung to me like damp fabric. Back at the Airbnb, I locked everything, the doors, the windows, even the interior door to the basement. I double-checked the security feed from my phone, everything looked normal. Still, I paced the perimeter once, phone in hand, convincing myself that it was over. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. I made dinner around 6, then settled in at the dining table with my laptop, reviewing notes for the presentation I was due to give on Monday. The neighbourhood was still. Occasional passing cars, a dog barking somewhere a few blocks over, but there was nothing else really. Then, at 8:40 p.m, my phone buzzed as a notification popped up. Motion detected, front porch. My breath caught, I tapped the notification and the app brought up an image. A man stood outside one of the windows. His hood was down, his face was pale, he was scruffy and bold. But what froze me, what made my stomach bottom out, were his clothes. Faded grey hoodie, white trainers, and bright red laces. I couldn't move. For several seconds long I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind blank, my limbs refusing to act. Then, instinct took over. I killed the lights, hoping the darkness would give me an edge. Maybe I'd be able to see him, without him seeing me. Then immediately I heard it, the faint crunch of gravel. The sound was coming from just outside the window to my right. I turned slowly, and he was there, pressed against the glass, face inches from the pane, scanning the interior. I screamed. The moment the sound left my throat, he vanished, footsteps pounding across the gravel towards the back of the house. I ran into the living room just in time to see him reappear, this time at the sliding glass doors leading to the patio. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned in, hands spread on either side of his head, trying to see inside. I screamed again, louder, sharper, and bolted up the stairs. I slammed the bedroom door, locked it, and called 911 with my hands shaking. My words stumbled out between sobs and gasps, trying to make sense of the terror. Thankfully, the police arrived in under 10 minutes. I heard shouting, saw flashlights flickering across the yard, and an officer stayed with me while the others swept the property. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing disturbed except for what the cameras had captured. He was gone. I showed the officers the footage and still image. They took a report and promised to review the feed in detail. I called Carol, the host, right after. She was horrified and offered a full refund without hesitation. I told her that I was leaving that night and that she would probably want to come down and have somebody watch over the house. After that, I called my boss and thankfully he understood. He told me to head home and present remotely if I could. I packed fast, my hands were trembling as I zipped my suitcase. The officers waited until I pulled out of the driveway. I drove 3 hours straight to a friend's place. I was still wide-eyed and wired by the time I arrived. I never found out who this guy was. Maybe he followed me from the trail, maybe he'd been watching me from the house long before I arrived. The police never found out. The footage was turned over, but there were no leads. What I do know is this though, if I hadn't accessed that security system, I might never have known that he was there until it was too late. Ever since then, I always check the windows, I never leave blinds open after dark, and I don't run alone in unfamiliar parks anymore. Because the worst part of that night wasn't the fear. It was the unmistakable feeling that, out of everybody, he chose me. I work remotely in software design, and to be honest, I'm much more comfortable behind a screen than dealing with the real world. But a few months ago, I hit a wall. Too many Zoom calls, too much noise, mental and digital. I needed to get out. So I booked a week-long stay at an Airbnb cabin out in Washington. It was quiet and secluded. Not completely cut off, there was still Wi-Fi if I needed to log in for work, but it promised solitude, a view of the woods, no neighbours in sight, and crucially, time to think. The place was on the edge of a small town called North Bend. The listing showed a cosy modern interior with a rustic charm. An updated kitchen, strong heating, and huge French doors that looked out onto the private backyard with the forest just beyond. I checked in on a cloudy Tuesday in February. The air was still, heavy with the kind of hush that comes before snow. Inside, the cabin was as advertised, clean, warm, and welcoming. I made a quick dinner, poured a glass of wine, and by 8 p.m, I was curled up in the reading nook near the back doors, half scrolling through my phone. And that's when I heard tapping. Tap, 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 3 times. I looked up. A man was standing just beyond the glass. He didn't knock hard, it was gentle and deliberate, like he wanted me to notice him but not to panic. He just stood there outside the porch light's reach, face shadowed, hoodie pulled up, jeans soaked to the cuffs, and he didn't say anything. He didn't wave, he just stood there tapping with 2 fingers. At first I thought maybe he was a local, lost maybe, but the longer I looked, the more I realised something was off. His posture was too still, too patient, and the second we locked eyes, he turned around without saying a word and just walked off straight towards the woods. I jumped up, yanked the door open and stepped out in the cold air to confront the guy. I shouted, asking what the hell he was doing back here and that he shouldn't be on the property. He didn't stop, he didn't even glance back, he just kept walking into the trees until the darkness swallowed him. I stood there confused, my heart beginning to hammer in my chest. Then I locked the door, I drew the curtains and grabbed the fire poker. I didn't call the police, maybe I should have, but it all happened so fast and I figured that if it was a prank or a trespasser, now that they've been seen, they surely wouldn't come back. But I was wrong. Around 9:45 PM I was on the couch trying to shake off the earlier experience with a movie when I heard something that sounded like floorboards creaking. It took me a second to realise that it was coming from outside. It was snow crunching. There were slow, steady footsteps on the gravel path that wrapped around the side of the cabin. A few moments later, the side door handle jiggled, at first only slightly, and then more aggressively. I froze, turned off all the lights and crouched low near the window. Through a crack in the curtain, I saw him again, the same hoodie, the same build. He was moving along the side of the house, slow and casual, like he had all the time in the world. He circled round to the backyard. This time, he again went just beyond the porch light. He crouched low watching the cabin, not moving, not blinking. It was like he knew exactly where I was and exactly how far the light could reach. I don't think he realised I could see him from my position though, so I opened the upstairs window and yelled out that I could see him and that I was calling the cops. That did it. He bolted, half crouched into the woods. I called the sheriff's office right after. I told them somebody had tried the doors and was watching the cabin. The dispatcher said they'd send somebody to patrol the area, but I could tell it wasn't a high priority. Probably figured it was a drunk or a trespasser. After hanging up, I checked every door and window, then barricaded myself into the bedroom. Finally, I called the owner to report the incident and asked if he'd had any issues before. He sounded irritated that I'd called so late, but what would he prefer, that I not tell him somebody was lurking on his land? A few moments later, he explained that nothing like this had ever happened, and that he'd call a neighbour to check the yard, but again, I didn't hold much hope. I tried to convince myself it was over, but it wasn't. At 12:41 AM, I woke to a sound that I'll never forget. Tapping, but closer this time. It was outside the bedroom window. I sat up, my skin crawling. The blinds were down, but the sound kept coming. I crept over to the window and lifted one slat. He was right there, on the porch roof, inches from the glass, his face partly obscured by a dark hood, his breath fogging the window. When he saw me looking, he looked straight at me and smiled. Then he laughed, quiet, almost playful, and then he turned and hopped off the roof and disappeared. He moved in a disturbing, menacing but playful way that just filled me with dread. A second later, I heard the back door rattle again. Someone was trying the handle. He was trying to get in again. Moments later, he began banging, screaming and laughing like he was insane. If there were neighbours around, they must have heard. I began panting heavily. Whatever happened, I couldn't let this guy get to me. He clearly wasn't well mentally. I backed away from the window and dragged some furniture in front of the bedroom door as a makeshift barricade. Seconds later, with my hands wet and clumsy from sweat and nerves, I called 911. This time, I didn't hold back. I told them he'd come back 3 times, tried 2 doors, and now he was trying to get in. The operator could hear the screaming through the call. They said the deputies were on their way and that I should stay put. I waited there, fire poker in hand, sitting in the dark, listening as the sounds eventually subsided. 15 minutes later, Red and blue lights washed across the walls. By the time they arrived, he was gone, just footprints leading back through the yard into the forest, and me shaking behind the locked bedroom door. The deputies searched the yard. They found nothing though. They did offer to stick around for a while, but I told them I'd be okay. One even gave me his direct number before leaving. I didn't sleep. Instead, I began packing immediately, and I left long before sunrise. When I messaged the Airbnb host, I got a one-line reply. That's never happened before. I didn't really believe it. I had a gut feeling that this had happened before. I hadn't thought about it before, but it occurred to me that the listing had been very cheap comparatively. Thankfully though, I did receive a full refund, but no word or follow-up from the owner as to what may have happened. A week later, I checked online, and the listing was gone. I don't know who that guy was, I don't know what he wanted, but I know this, he did wait. He watched, and he came back. And he knew exactly when I'd start to feel safe again. I still think about this sometimes, how quiet it was, how deliberate, like he'd done it before. Maybe he had. Maybe I wasn't the first person he watched. Maybe I was just the one who noticed. I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't seen him at the glass that first night, if I hadn't yelled, if I'd been asleep. That's the part that sticks with me. Not the tapping, not the screaming, not the grin, but the sense that the whole time I was trying to relax, to unwind, somebody was already out there, watching.